Welcome back to Dr. Supercoach YouTube for Pigs Round 19 Captaincy Recommendations. We are now 3/4 of the way through the Supercoach year. It feels like it's gone quick. It also feels like it's dragged on and taken forever, but here we are. Only 6 rounds left, 2 rounds until Supercoach finals. So if you're still in that running to try and make and just get into Supercoach finals, captaincy is going to be so important for that. So welcome to the right place. It's getting close. We're getting to the end of the year. Last time to make those charges. So there were some monster scores last round. I mean, that Josh Dacos 198 was insane. I actually captained that in one of my draft leagues, so that felt pretty good. But then there was also a Bont 174. Then there were 150s from Dawson, Rao, Grundy, Butters, Meek, Dunkley. I mean, that's some pretty heavily owned players, so hopefully you got onto one of them. So what I did, I nicked Dacos VC. Obviously didn't take that. I was then always planning on the Butters captaincy, but I decided to trade in Grundy and captain him. And this was when I think Nick Martin got injured. I was going to do Gawn and McKercher in 2 trades. I said, no, let's just do Grundy in 1 so that I can, save a trade. Man, I got in Grundy. That was great. And I went, cool, let's go captain on this guy. Both of those players, Butters and Grundy, they both scored a 154. So there was no wrong answer there for me, and I'm very happy to be a Brody Grundy owner with his upcoming run. Now, moving on to round 19. So I'm recording this on Tuesday afternoon before the tribunal hearings. So I'm just going to assume that Cherry's suspension is upheld, but I'll talk about that when I get to the relevant section. Adam Cherry and Zach Bailey's hearings are also going to be happening, but I don't think they're really going to affect this video. So let's get stuck into it. If the tribunals, by the time you listen to this, you'll know the results of the suspension. So if Cherry is playing, that changes things and you can adjust. But I'll explain that when I get to the section. Number 3 VC, Lachie Whitfield. Lachie is no doubt one of the best Supercoach defenders at the moment. He's a guy with a floor of 84 and a ceiling of 148 this year, if you remove that injury-affected concussion game. He's got incredible consistency with 3 scores over 140. That's a really, really good year. Well, this week, it gets even better for him. This is a matchup with Essendon, who are the second easiest opponent for designated kickers this season. And truthfully, the Bombers are such a rabble this year that they are giving up points all around the ground. But the opposition designated kickers are definitely taking advantage. We saw Vlosten go 23 points over his current form when he matched up with the Bombers. But before that, Jeffrey went 41 points over his form. Yulin went 17. Luke Ryan went 51 points above what he's been doing. And then Guthrie 16 and Hollands went 45 points above what his current form is. So you get the picture. There's a wide range of opposition defenders that are well and truly outdoing their season average in their matchup with the Bombers. Look, Whitfield managed a 105 last week against who is pretty much the hardest opponent for designated kickers in Geelong. So what's he going to do now against the second easiest opponent? It could be brutal, and this is worth a VC shout for sure. But his teammate, number 2, Tom Green, I like this just similar, but maybe a smidge better. Tom Green, he's been a great trade-in for those that got him before his bye and got those double 130s. But since then, he's gone a 105 and a 97 in 2 reasonably okay matchups. He probably should have done better. The matchup with the Eagles that led to that 105 was probably the most disappointing, as he had 35 disposals and 7 marks, and he just couldn't convert it into a big score. But this week, he could. If you're an inside midfielder and you see a matchup with Essendon, you have to think you're in for a good day. Look, especially with no Jai Caldwell or Will Setterfield, who sometimes play that defensive mid-role. The Bombers are clearly tanking, and they're not tagging as a result. They even let Tim Taranto explode for 135 last week. And then prior to that, there was a Noah Anderson 127, a Caleb Sarong 149, and a Max Holmes 155. So that's just in the last month. They've given up huge scores in the last month. Like I said, this is a Bombers team that is riddled with injuries, but they're also not even trying. And with GWS firmly in that logjam of teams trying to make finals, I don't see a reason for Tom Green to not absolutely destroy Essendon in this one. I also thought about recommending Finn Callahan in this one, so if you have him, I think he could also be a pretty nice VC. I just think that the Bombers' tiny midfielders, I mean, you think about guys like Zach Merritt and Ben Hobbs and Elijah Sardis if he gets named. Imagine those guys trying to tackle Tom Green. That's just not going to stop. So I just think the Bombers' midfielders are going to have no answer for Tom Green's heft and girth, and he could get 12 clearances with his eyes closed in this one. Number 1 VC is the Bont. Look, I didn't recommend Marcus Bontempelli as an option last week because he was playing the Crows, and they were one of the hardest matchups for inside midfielders to score against. In fact, no midfielder had gone over 126 against the Crows for 10 weeks. That's how restrictive they were. Well, Richards and Bont both did that on the weekend, with Marcus putting up a ridiculous 174. So well done if you captained him. This week, the matchup again isn't ideal. It's against Brisbane, and they're restrictive to inside mids. Look, George Huitt managed a 131 against the Lions last week, but prior to that, there hasn't been a single 130 plus score from a midfielder against Brisbane for 10 weeks. But this has given me serious deja vu, because in round 5, I was saying the same thing against Brisbane when people were buying Nick Dacos. I remember saying, look, no one scored 130 on the Lions all year, so don't expect Dacos to. But then he went up to Queensland and he cracked that 172 on my head. So fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I'm not going to make that mistake again. Brisbane is a team that generally don't tag. Like, they do sit Josh Dunkley on the opposition's best player. Will he go to Bont? Will he go to Libba? Will he go to Richards? Who knows? Look, it's hard to go past a Bont VC on a Friday night. His ceiling is just the best ceiling in the game. He could give you a 60 like he has in recent weeks, or like if Dunkley clamps him, that could be on the cards. But if he gets off the chain and isn't tagged, there could be another 170 if he's allowed to roam free. And that is what your VC punt is there for a really high upside guy. And there just isn't anyone better than Bont at doing that. Pod. Errol Goulden. In only 6% of teams at the beginning of this week, Errol is a real pod for the run home. Remember, this is a guy who's averaged about 110 SuperCoach in each of the last 2 years, and he's played every game in that span before this season. Not only that, he's a guy with 11 SuperCoach scores over 140 in his career and a personal best of 188. Although that was in a preliminary final, so it doesn't show up on the SuperCoach app, you won't find it there, but he does have a 188 to his name. This week, he matches up with North Melbourne, who are the easiest matchup for inside midfielders this season. They're a positive matchup for wingmen, and they're a positive matchup for designated kickers. So Errol's only doing about 15% CBAs since returning to full game time this year. But despite that, he's averaging 120 SuperCoach in that time, in those 3 full games. And they have been against some of the more restrictive opponents. So that's really good. I did also consider Isaac Heaney or Chad Warner for this pod slot. So if you have them, I think they're also really solid options. Heaney in particular is very stiff not to make this top 10. I just like the ceiling in Goulden at the moment, especially given the fact that he pumped the Kangaroos for a 142 in this corresponding game last year. Some recent midfielder scores against North include Libba's 177, Bont's 133, Newcomb's 119, Sarong's 142, and Brayshaw's 130. Now you will probably notice that a lot of those guys are those in and under grunt midfielders, so maybe Heaney is the call, but I've just got a feeling they're just going to let Goulden run free at the SCG, and when he does that, it's huge. The matchup and the form is certainly there here for Errol. I wouldn't be surprised actually to see all 3 of the Sydney midfielders take advantage, and I've just got Goulden here as my pod, as I think he's probably the one with the ceiling at the moment. Number 6, captains. Let's go on to captain, Zach Butters. Zach's form indicates he probably should be higher on this list. He's got a 3-round average of 130, and thanks to that juicy 154 last week. But a matchup with Hawthorn is never an easy task. So I've still got him here, it's probably just not as high as some might think. The Hawks are smack bang neutral for opposing midfielders, but as I scroll back through the scores against, I have to go back all the way to round 12 to see any captaincy worthy 125s against the Hawks. And even then, that was from Steel Sidebottom, so it wasn't really someone they probably put much time into defensively. And in that time, we've seen the likes of Brayshaw, Sarong, McRae, LDU, Dawson, Richards, Bont and Dacos all fail to crack the 125 against Hawthorn in that time. But this is Zach Butters in great form. Surely he at least gets you a 120. Especially with no Jason Horne-Francis, you think he's probably got to take up even more midfield time and really dominate out there. I've got him here. I don't think this is a ceiling game. I don't think we're thinking a 140. But I think he could probably sneak you a solid captaincy score, around 120, 125. He's not my favourite, but if you don't have any of the following 5 options, I thought I'd give you another option there. But I like all of these next 5 better. Number 5 is Lloyd Meek. He plays Port Adelaide, and Port Adelaide are the 5th easiest matchup for ruckman over the last 10 games. In recent weeks, it shows that they've tightened up a bit according to the DFS DVP data, but I actually think that's a bit false. When I look into that further, that Port have only played against Matt Flynn, Darcy Fort, and a sore Tom De Koning in the last 3 weeks, so of course those guys aren't going to score that well and it's going to skew the data a bit. I think Luke Jackson's 163, Gawn's 126 and Grundy's 159 against Port are more an indicator of what premium ruckman can do against the power. Lloyd Meek comes into this game against Port fresh off a 151 and a 140. The man is in form. He actually has a 5-round average of 122. That's very impressive for a 5-round average. Now combine that with the easy battle against Huitt, and I think you've got a really safe 130 here from Meekie. He does play in the 3rd game of the round, so it is pretty early, but it allows you to have a crack at a high ceiling VC on the Thursday or Friday. There's some guys already mentioned. It could be Whitfield, Green, Callaghan, Bont, Libba, Richards, Neil, Dunkley, Zorko. There's plenty of options there. So if you are trading Cherry to Meek, why not give Meek a captaincy armband on debut this week? George Huitt, what a rock solid contributor he is, both to Carlton and to our Supercoach teams. He's got nothing below 85 and nothing above 131 in the last 6 weeks. He's just hitting this spot all the time. That makes a really safe bet for a fullback captain option. Although this week against Melbourne, I wouldn't be surprised to see a bit more of a spike score. The Demons are the 2nd easiest matchup for inside midfielders, and they've recently given up a 123 to Sheasel, a 131 to Rankin, a 147 to Rao, a 136 to Jason Horne-Francis, and a 122 to Steel Sidebottom. Now, admittedly, those aren't eye-watering numbers, but that's kind of become because they're coming from those second-string midfielders. The Demons don't mind tagging the opposition's best player, and most people would think that's probably Patrick Cripps this week, even though he's out of form. So Huitt is someone that doesn't usually cop attention, and he's probably going to just be left to go head-to-head with someone like Jack Viney or Clary. That should allow him to rack up his normal disposals and tackle numbers and give us a really safe captaincy score. This one's probably similar. I don't think this one's going to be over 140, but I also don't think it's going to be under 120. I think it's just going to be safe, solid, secure. George Huitt. Now we're starting to get a little bit bigger. Nank. Nank makes my captaincy video for the 3rd week in a row. His 91 against the Cats 2 weeks ago was a bit of an outlier because his fantasy stats were great. He just butchered it. But he redeemed himself for owners last week with a 132 against the Bombers. Well, this week he gets the easiest matchup of them all. A date with the Eagles. Whether it's Bailey Williams, Matt Flynn or both, it doesn't really matter. This West Coast team are giving up the most points to opposition ruckmen this year, and in recent weeks we've seen scores of 95 from Sweet, 141 from Briggs, 111 from Cameron, 123 from De Koning, and 153 from Cherry. Plus, if I go back a bit further, I'm sure you remember the 161 to Riley O'Brien, 179 from Marshall, and that massive 198 from Gawn. Insane numbers, all against West Coast. Nank is someone who's shown us a 150 plus ceiling on multiple occasions. He's actually got a career high of 184. I didn't realise that. Now, I'm not saying a 184 is on the cards this week, but if he doesn't pump out another big captaincy score, I'll be pretty shocked. Playing on the Saturday night, this is a great fallback captaincy option, but I actually think there's enough ceiling in this one if you want to use it as your high upside VC. Number 2, Jordan Dawson. Much like Bontempelli last week, Dawson defied a very hard matchup to post a huge score. In his case, it was a 157. That now makes it 2 months in a row that Dawson hasn't dipped below 98. That's a huge achievement for him, given his tendencies to plop a 60 on his owners. This week he matches up with Gold Coast, who are the 6th easiest matchup for inside midfielders over the last 10 games, and a team that have not been tagging. They've been backing guys like Rowell and Anderson to win them the ball, and that suits us from a Supercoach perspective because it means they're not tagging our players. But that's led to scores of 159 from Merritt, 121 from Pickett, 136 from Green, and 152 from Holmes against the Suns in recent weeks. Now, Nick Dacos failed in this corresponding matchup last week, but that happens from time to time. I'm not too worried about that. Remember that epic blockbuster these two teams played earlier in the year? Dawson had 124 in that game, but Rankin was actually the really dominant one. So if the Suns put attention into anyone, it may well be ex-Sun Isaac Rankin. That might just leave Jordan Dawson free to do what he wants. But here as well, there's a bit of narrative with this one. The Crows are in a fight for a top 4 position. They could be top 4, and every game is going to be crucial, especially this game against another top 4 hopeful. So I expect Adelaide's captain to lead from the front to try and get his team the win. He's playing the last game of the round, and that means you can VC nearly anyone you want and roll it into Jordan Dawson. Here we go, Brodie Grundy. Brodie Grundy is the best player in Supercoach this season. I'm calling it. He's rocketed up to 3rd in total points, only just behind Gawn and Cherry. And I think Grundy's going to finish in the number 1 spot by the year's end. I think we need to take a second to reflect on his season. Brodie Grundy looked washed at times last year, and even the first few weeks of this year wasn't putting up the numbers we expected. But have a listen to this. In round 9, Brodie Grundy was available for 504k. Since that time, he's risen 234k in cash, and he's averaged 144 Supercoach over those 9 rounds. An average of 144 from 9 rounds. That's incredible. I got a bit nerdy, and I wanted to check where that stacked up against prime Collingwood Brodie Grundy. Let me tell you, it beats prime Collingwood Brodie Grundy. Prime Collingwood Brodie Grundy never had a consecutive 9-week stretch in which he put up a 144 average. Ever. This is the best 9-week Supercoach stretch of his entire career. And I think we need to give the man all the credit he deserves. And the good news for owners is that I don't see him slowing down. He's got the easiest run home for all ruckmen in the competition, and this week against Tristan Cherry was meant to be his only hard matchup left. Well, look how the cookie crumbles if Cherry is suspended. The Dr. Supercoach Slack members were trying to work out who rucks in Cherry's absence. Names like Jack Darling, Bryn Teagle, Taylor Goad and Callum Coleman-Jones were discussed. And no offence to any of those guys, but they are not AFL ruckmen. And they've got to go up against Brodie Grundy in Super Saiyan Blue form. Good luck. This one could be a bloodbath. As you know, I'm recording this before the tribunal hearings, so I'm assuming Cherry is missing. If Cherry plays, Grundy will still make this list. He'll still make the top 10, but he won't be at number 1. I'll probably bump him down a few spots to maybe 5 or 6, but if Cherry doesn't play, which I'm expecting, this Grundy isn't just the top ranking, he's the top ranking by the length of the Flemington Straight. He is the only option if you are an owner and you need to save your VC for him. And I will be so mad if you don't. Anyway, those are my favourite 10 captain options for the week. But as always, here's a bunch of names that didn't quite make the cut. Really good for draft leagues. Some of them you could probably consider for your classic as well. Finn Callaghan, Lockie Ash, Isaac Heaney. 3 guys really, really stiff not to make that top 10. 3 guys who I think will have really big weeks and all could be very good VCs in Classic and elite in Draft as well. Then we got Chad Warner. I think Chad will do pretty well, so more so for Draft probably. Tim Taranto is in really good form, well, after judging on his last week anyway, and now he gets a date with the Eagles, so I think Tim Taranto is an option in Draft. You could look at Bailey Smith or Max Holmes against Saints. Like, Saints do give up plenty to wingers, and those guys are really good hard-running guys, but maybe someone gets tagged, but you could consider them. Darcy Cameron, there's been speak about him getting a rest at some stage. I haven't actually heard when that'll be, so I'm just going to assume he's playing until I hear otherwise. He's an option against Freo because they're giving up plenty of points to Ruckman. And then Josh Dacos, like, he just had that 198, and now Freo are giving up points to defenders, so he is a really good option. And then in that last game of the round that I haven't mentioned, I think Noah Anderson and Matt Rowell could do well. Like I said, Adelaide are a bit of a tough matchup, but as I talked about with Jordan, you know, they're in the hunt for a top 4 as well. So those two will be going to be going hard, especially Noah Anderson, the captain, trying to lock in a top 4 spot. That's the video for this week. I'm so locked into VC and Grundy, it's not funny. Then I'll be quite happy falling back on George Huitt or Jordan Dawson. It'll probably be Dawson for me. Look, if Cherry plays and I don't get that juicy Grundy matchup, I'm probably going to VC Bont or Whitfield and hope for a spike. But either way, I'm really comfortable rolling into Jordan Dawson as my captain. And I want Cherry to play because he's in my team and I don't have the trades to get rid of him. But if he doesn't, Brodie Grundy is waiting there, licking his lips. Thanks for watching. Good luck this weekend. 6 rounds left. Let's give it a crack.